everybody woke up and is present today. So it's our last, I'm very sad, our last session. And Gerold Necker from Halle will start with how the zodiac man entered a Kabbalistic manuscript. So please, Gerold, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. But first of all, let me thank again our organizers, but today in particular, la festeggiata, tanti auguri di buon compleanno. But that's the diaspora, I have to start now.
Yeah.
So,
No mercy.
almost 100 years ago, Gershom Scholem published Sefer HaTamar, the late medieval Hebrew translation of a lost Arabic work on divination by Abu Aflach of Syracuse. In the introduction to his German translation, Scholem thanked Abbé Warburg in Hamburg for sending him copies of the manuscript Munich 214. And here are the notes of Widmanstätte, which you can, of course, read in Maximilian's wonderful book about Widmanstätte's library. And Scholem emphasized how important Sefer HaTamar was for understanding the Hellenistic legacy of medieval esoteric literature. Shortly before this edition appeared, the crucial role of astromagic texts had become manifest through Abbé Warburg's rediscovery of the medieval Latin compendium Picatrix, which was later identified as a translation of the Islamic treatise The Aim of the Sage, known in Hebrew versions like here in Munich as Tachlit HaChacham. In 1926, the very same year, Scholem edited the Hebrew text of the Book of the Palm Tree. Here's the edition. Abbé Warburg arranged for the third edition of the classic introduction to the history of astrology, written by his late friend Franz Boll. Warburg designed a new cover using an anonymous woodcut from the second edition of Johannes Angelus Astrolabium Planum. Here's the second edition, Venice 4094, which Warburg described as the portrait of a seated astronomer lost in thought as he leans against a tree holding an astrolabe in his right hand. At his feet are an inkwell, compass, and sextant. According to Warburg, this woodcut recalls Albrecht Dürer's 1514 engraving Melancholia. But I would rather highlight the similarity to another picture we are very familiar with, the frontispiece of the Latin paraphrase of Cicatia's Shaire Ora, Porta Lucis, and printed in Augsburg, 1516. And Saverio showed us already the picture. It must be admitted, it is very appropriate to imagine the Kabbalist surrounded by an atmosphere of melancholic loneliness, at least when considering Marsilio Ficino's understanding of melancholy. For that matter, the portrait of the Kabbalist as an old man receives too little attention compared to the Sephirotic tree he holds in his right hand. In any case, both pictures date from the same period. They illustrate complementary fields of study, and their visual similarity may correspond to a certain kind of relationship regarding astrology, astromagic, and Kabbalah. The obvious question to ask here is whether and how this relationship can be clarified with the help of the so-called zodiac man or homo signorum, who had already started his career in pagan antiquity. Unfortunately, no such illustration was adopted into early Arabic manuscripts, though along with astronomical tables, elements of zodiacal iconography are implied, especially when it comes to individual signs which were related to the production of talismans. The earliest examples date back to the 12th century, but here's a more dramatic picture, a detail from the Book of Wonders. In addition, another feature became increasingly important, the 28 lunar stations or mansions of the moon zodiac, as they were called. The idea of zodiacal melotesia in Greek and in the following melotesia, that is, medical prognostics that related human organs and functions to the motions of the celestial bodies, gained ground in the Islamic world. Naturally, the application of astrology to medicine, also known as iatromathematics, could be distributed along with the art of casting horoscopes in company with bibliomancy, geomancy, and dream interpretations. The artistic elaboration of a zodiac man could not be stopped anymore when it came to the medieval reception of ancient astral mythology in Christianity, not least thanks to the translations of astrological texts at the court of Sicily. My tribute to the genius Loki. The theoretical foundation for the astromagic background, however, can best be outlined through this book Speculum Astronomiae, probably to be ascribed to Albertus Magnus, here accompanied by the 9th century astronomer David Ibn Qur. I will come back to him in a minute. In the Speculum, astrology and magic are discussed in terms of theological integrity, with the denial of the idea that astrological science negates humankind's free will. The main argument is encapsulated in the aphorism Sapiens dominabitur astres. The wise man will be master of the stars. Only bodily passions, which dominate most people, yet not always against their will, impede intellectual control. Nevertheless, the astral influence on the human body, visible on Earth as the filtered and modified light originating in its pure form in an inaccessible divine source, could also be used in a recent way, especially for medical purposes. In this respect, the various illustrations of the Zodiac Man show some differences when it comes to the iconic design and its conceptual development. The earliest extant image of Melothesia, dating from the early 11th century, presents a zodiacal rota in Roman style with an imperial Helios at the center and the four seasons in the corners. I wonder whether some plain Christian disclaimer could be echoed in the heading, according to the delusions of the philosophers, 12 signs are noted. And then let's begin with Aries. The Latin text below the circle reads, all the signs belong to the human body, and they are the signs of the sun appearing in the sky. The inscriptions connected to these signs specify the various parts of the body, but in an unusual way. While the 7 signs from Virgo to Pisces refer to bodily parts, the remaining signs, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, and Leo, correspond to 5 parts of the head. For example, here, Gemini, the contour, the abbreviation oculi, and Cancer points to os, mouth. Surprising are some hints implying that the signs may also refer to a female body. Scorpio is connected to mamilla, nipples, and Sagittarius points to the genitalia labeled as pudenda. Be that as it may, the typical design of an anatomical homo signorum presents a naked male man. Only occasionally appears a female counterpart, like in this wonderful housebook from Tübingen, dated 1404. On the right side, we notice again the continuation of the late antique Roman zodiac circle design. Illustrations of the Homo signorum are intended to show the specific body parts together with the prevailing zodiac sign. Sometimes the 7 planets are added or the 4 elements. And here we have a group of zodiac men, and on the right side, this happens to be the oldest extant illustration of a vertical zodiac man, Homo signorum, the first man standing, so to speak. Such an approach to literally incorporate both the planets and the elements emerged already in late antiquity. For example, in the Papyri Graecae Magicae, we read in the ritual of Systasis, meeting one's own daimon. You are the one who has in yourself the mixture of universal nature and who begot the 5 wandering stars, which are the entrails of heaven, the guts of earth, the fountainhead of the waters, and the violence of fire. Ultimately, the microcosmic human being may even metamorphose into the macrocosmic zodiac, as an illustration from a Vienna manuscript shows. Another feature which should be mentioned, of course, in particular, is the famous late medieval miniature in the Duke of Berry's book of Hours, the Richeur, one of the aesthetical most appealing examples. I'm sure you're acquainted with this picture. The mystery of the additional figure is still fascinating. Some assumed that it is its hermaphrodite character, together with other beautifully illustrated youthful bodies in the book, betray a homoerotic tendency of the commissioner of the work, Jean de Valois, but I would rather suggest that this doubling alludes to the Platonic myth of man's separation into a male half and a female half, which would explain why both figures show traces of an androgynous appearance. The text of the illustration describes the properties of each sign in the respective cardinal direction according to the basic qualities of hot, cold, wet, and dry, as well as the four temperaments: choleric, melancholic, sanguine, and phlegmatic. We know that this theory of zodiacal melodicia was also adopted in medieval Hebrew sources, starting with Abraham ibn Ezra's Reshit Chochmah, Sefer HaMeorot, then Mishpetei HaMasalot. Prominent example from the 14th century, based on both Abraham ibn Ezra and Pseudo-Ptolemy's Centiloquium, is David ben Yom Tov's Klal Katan, edited 10 years ago by Gerrit Voss, Charles Burnett, and Zvi Langerman. Finally, another type of illustration, the homo venarum or rain man, visualizes the details for the techniques of bloodletting, the standard medical treatment for balancing the bodily humors. And in fact, this is how the zodiac man found its way into a single Hebrew illuminated manuscript, a medical miscellany dated around 1430. And this illustration combines the characteristics of the Homo signorum with those of the Homo venarum. So this singular example of a Hebrew zodiac man is embedded in a certain phlebotomical context. The idea of connecting zodiac signs with body parts took on a life of its own and appears in Hebrew calendars, which also know the critical or unlucky days for bloodletting and other activities. Here is a Christian calendar. Actually, a folding almanac, also including vein man and urine flasks for uroscopy. An interesting case is the multiple text manuscript Cambridge 3127, copied in 1399, partly in 1414, including mainly halachic liturgical and homiletic writings. By the calendar tables, one of the earliest extant texts representing the genre of Sifre Evonot, Karlebach, of course, made a research on that, follow after extracts from Shimushei Tehillim, Psalm 94 to 140, and Shimushei Torah. The months are listed with their Jewish and Christian names. You can see it here up at the top. And the days include references to Christian saints, starting with Jesus' circumcision on the 1st of January, as well as a chart with the best and worst days for bloodletting and rotated by 90 degrees. Additional clauses about the melodician and humoral aspects like those that appear in Homo signorum illustrations. Here, the zodiac signs are described in a manner that they can clearly be identified as talismans. For example, Aries is depicted as a ram without a tongue, or most impressively, the month Elul, Virgo, which governs the stomach, appears in the image of a woman riding on a lion. While the astromagic views in this Julian calendar are linked to a Christian background, the question arises of the extent to which this development is just part of scientific collaboration or Christian influence in some late medieval medical applications, especially bloodletting, or whether in fact an earlier and much more essential affinity between astrology, magic, and Kabbalah was of some consequence. To get straight to the point, yes. An esoteric dimension shared by these three areas was vital for the diffusion of astromagic views, but no, an earlier stage for their shared history than Renaissance times cannot be successfully reconstructed, at least so far. However, all of you heard the Gal's lecture yesterday, and it seems the picture becomes clearer now. Obviously, astromagic was per se an intercultural feature and cannot be treated solely from a Jewish, Christian, Islamic, or whatever perspective. Having said this, I would like to touch first of all upon the Kabbalistic point of view. Astral magic appeared in Hebrew translations in 13th century Spain, and though it could well have been assimilated by the early Kabbalists, not many of them actually did this. Most noteworthy are Nachmanides, who referred to as Sefer Levana, which is also quoted in Abraham Esquerra's Sefer Yesod Olam, or Abba Mari of Lunel, who accused Jewish physicians in Montpellier of using the figure of a lion with a female rider for curing kidney disease, which was, incidentally, a treatment that Arnaldus de Villanova successfully applied at the same time to Pope Bonifacius VIII, who suffered from nephrolithiasis, kidney stones. Aber Mari's addressee, Shlomo ibn Adrat, the Rashba, attested his approval of this talismanic magic, and less fumigation of spices was involved, and indicated he could base his decision on Ramban's own medical practice. Thanks to Josef Schatzmiller and further research by Raimund Leicht, we know about the literary background. Different Hebrew versions and redactions of a book of the form of the 12 signs of the zodiac, Sefer Tzorot Shnai Masar Masalot, came into use around 1300, similar to contemporary Latin manuals called sigilla, including descriptions of the material, the benedictions to be engraved, and indications of which ailments are to be cured or other wishes to be fulfilled. It seems not very much literature in Hebrew regarding the use of talismans was circulating at this point. Aside from the translations already mentioned, Tachlit Chacham, Sefer HaLebana, and the Book of Images, another work of Minima Magica Astrologica is the Mavor HaGadol, a translation of the great introduction to the epistle on talismans ascribed to Balinus, that is, Pseudo Apollonius of Siena. He was mentioned already in 1 or 2 lectures. A special case is the literature produced under the reign of King Alfonso El Sabio of Castile. At his court, a hotbed of different types of esoteric texts was formed, and both Tachlit Chacham and Sefer Tzorot Shnai Masar Masalot are linked to this school of cultural intermediaries, and to one of its classical outcomes, the so-called Picatrix, in the wake of which shorter, perhaps more popular writings also came into fashion, astro-magic pulp fiction, so to speak. Such an pejorative connotations of these works seem to have prevailed, not just Maimonidean partisans, but also for a certain number of learned Kabbalists. For example, when Bach ibn Asher quotes from what he calls the letter of Balinus, the ascetic rules to be followed in order to connect to the planet Saturn, which is linked to Shabbat, he cannot but contrast these depressing preparations with the joyful experience the Torah provides for this happy day. Connections between heavenly spheres and human anatomy are found in some sephirotic illustrations, and one might hypothesize a link between these and the zodiac man. While there are 12 signs in the zodiac man, but 10 sephirot, vertical structure can better be brought into line with the model of 10 celestial spheres, the ongoing debates about this number notwithstanding, as you can see here. Some prefer 9 and not 10, or 11 and not 10. However, when we compare the Homo Signorum with, for example, a diagram of the well-known Kabbalistic Parma Codex from 1286, mentioned already by Yossi, of course, we can recognize only a few matches. The zodiac man appears to be somehow eviscerated. And by the way, the 10 spheres, Galgala Sechel, which was missing in the former Munich manuscript of Meshala Kadmoni. But let's take a closer look. While the brain, Moach, may, as Passportotto, correspond to the head of the zodiac man, the presence of the palate, Chech, is surprising, and the tongue, Lashon, is clearly favored against the neck of the zodiac man. The arms are common to both diagrams, but the heart is replaced by the spinal cord, Chut Vashitra. The thighs, short yamin small, again coincide, also Brit, but specified by circumcision. And instead of feet, the female partner, Patsuko, is mentioned in the 10th place. Circumcision and tongue are highlighted in Sefer Yetzirah, and Patsuko alludes to the Midrash that introduces Knesset Israel as partner of the Shabbat. And since all parts are charged with Kabbalistic symbolism, the heart would fit to the spinal cord, both symbolize Tiferet. Kabbalistic interpretation also clarifies the reason for introducing the palate According to Bachya Ben Asher's commentary on B'Tselem Elohim, for example, this particular body part is mentioned because of the kissing scene in Shir HaShirim 5:16. His mouth is most sweet, chikom mamtakim, usually translated with mouth. So in a sense, Shulamit's lover took the place of the zodiac man. In addition, the Kabbalistic set of correspondences between body parts and heavenly bodies was complemented by the Hebrew letters, again on the basis of Sefer Yetzirah. And thus a context emerges in which, as if it were a talisman, the human body made from dust of the ground matches the divine shape of Yud He Vav He, as long as it stays Betzalmo in his image, as explained, for example, in Menachem Zion's commentary on Genesis 1:27. When looking for Kabbalistic manuscripts that may offer, if not illuminations of a zodiac man, at least instructions for designing material zodiac designs with practical Kabbalistic implications, the starting point should be Sefer Raziel, because it includes the earliest combination of astrology with magical practice, and some Kabbalistic texts are embedded in its various redactional forms. The manuscript New York JTS 8117 exemplifies the development of the astromagical traditions of Sefer Rasim from late antiquity through medieval translations of the Latin Liber Razielis and parallels to the Picatrix up to the early 17th century, when this manuscript was copied. It is no coincidence that the writings that follow Sefer Raziel in the New York manuscript also emerged from translations, but this time from Arabic sources. First, the great introduction to the Epistle on Talismans by Pseudo-Apollonius, and second, Sefer Shnaim Asar Maselot, including a partial Hebrew translation of the Imaginibus by Pseudo-Ptolemy, which parallels to the Picatrix. 8 instructions have been identified in Judeo-Arabic Genisa fragments of the Imaginibus and edited by Gidi Bohak and Charles Burnett. Sure, you're acquainted with this edition, together with David Ibn Kuras on talismans and evidence of Adelard of Bath's Liber Prestigiorum Tevidis, the main medium through which the concept of talisman was distributed in the Western world. However, the New York manuscript includes 2 versions of Sefer Shnaim Asar Maselot. The first one, entitled Mifrach Sodot HaElyonim, describes a talisman we have repeatedly come across as follows. Virgo, its true design is a woman sitting on a lion holding a staff or reins in her hand, and it helps against sickness of the left kidney. Then follow the details of the constellation and position of the planets necessary for crafting an effective talisman. Apparently, this impressive icon is of a pre-Islamic origin, like this Athena figure holding a staff and standing on a lion front in Chatra, dated in the first half of the 3rd century. Sandwiched between 2 sections of the Pseudo-Apollonian treatise Great Introduction in this manuscript is a collection of 70 talismans entitled Shar Begalui Maaseh Talasim. Here, actually, Begalui Hamaaseh Hatalasmim, which has received less attention so far. In fact, we find here some additional descriptions, such as the form of a swine that helps to remove a harmful spirit, or in order to raise one's fighting spirit, associated, of course, with the planet Mars, the form of a lion with bird's claws, listed as number 29 on the next folio. This image points again to a Middle or Far Eastern origin, where such powerful guardians were placed in front of many pagodas or temples. In general, these instructions follow the same order. First, the specific astrological calculations and the design of the talisman. Second, a spell, often including Judeo-Arabic words or ring letters, the characters we heard of yesterday, or both. And third, the image has to be buried. The information concerning the connections between zodiac signs and body parts that matters most in our context is summarized in a short passage indicated as a comment and placed just before the collection of the 70 talismans. The ordering principle from head to heel, ad capite ad calcem, is comparable to the zodiac man. Additional characteristics of the images, like without tongue or without eyes, notwithstanding. Yet there is one significant difference between Batten and the female womb replaces the buttocks of the zodiac man. There are a very few illustrations that fit such a distinctly androgynous approach. However, they do exist. Here's a Breslau manuscript, the Munich manuscript, Codices Latini 206, would have been better, but I didn't have access to the digital version. In any case, the development of the zodiac man that appeared in medieval Europe for the first time in the form of an upright human being, and not God like Helios, belongs mainly to a medical, not necessarily astromagic genre. Only when medieval Latin translations transmitted text that combined zodiac melothesia with a talismanic practice, along with cosmological esoteric Hebrew sources from late antiquity, like Sefer HaSiel, a new Christian Hermetic tradition was established. Marsilio Ficino, for example, was able to connect, at least in his 3 books on life, the Humus Signorum and the healing power of a talisman, helping against, say, kidney disease, though in this case, in Ficino's image, the sun, not a woman, takes its place upon the line. Such traditions are reflected in the Hebrew translations of New York 81:17, and one could add that on a similar backdrop, Yochanan Alemano compared Chochmat HaTzorot, the science of images or talismans, based on reference to Sefer Tamar in his Sefer Cheshek Shlomo, with the, in his eyes, superior Kabbalistic knowledge based on Sefer Yetzirah. By the time Christian Sephirotic systems with astrological influences emerged, the era of the zodiac man had almost come to an end due to new astronomic discoveries. Athanasius Kircher, in his encyclopedic work, still provides an overview of medical, magical, astrological, and Kabbalistic systems, and many more, although he no longer takes talismanic practice seriously, but he describes some images like the sun upon a lion, and see, of course, here the famous Elan, Iconismus Crucius Cabale Summam Continens. It's, well, an image containing the entire summary of the entire Kabbalah. Wonderful. A re-evaluation of Astrum, and you notice the astrological signs along the 7 lower Sephirot, but it differs from the sequence we have here in the Analogio Borum. A re-evaluation of astromagical history was reserved for its scientific rediscovery in the 20th century. Well, and that's where we started. Warburg's new cover, and used it also as an ex libris. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. It was exactly 30 minutes. So we have now 15 minutes for questions. Oh, yeah. Okay, so please, oh, sorry.
I must say, I forgot the question mark in my title. How did enter a Kabbalistic match? I should have. Yes.
This was really astounding.
Thank you.
Really fascinating, and I realized how missing the Zodiac Man was from my paper yesterday. My question is regarding the 13th century. I'm not sure I followed exactly your claim, because my impression was that 13th century, especially late 13th century, is full of these ideas. No, you are ambiguous about how significant, and the follow-up question is specifically the Zoharic use, and especially the Tikkunei Zohar.
Tikkunei Zohar, the planets appear. I know, but it's a very odd sequence in Tikkunei Zohar. It's Tikkun 70, I think.
That's the main one, but in general, he is very interested in signs, I think, if I remember correctly, I haven't looked at it recently, and also the physiognomical aspects in the Zohar. That's another side which seems to me relevant. And
Yes.
I'm asking more than saying.
Yes.
The whole physiognomy aspect of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of course, true. I could have used such material and delve into Zoharic literature, which I didn't. But I searched for parallels to the zodiac man because it was so ubiquitous in the Middle Ages. I couldn't imagine that we don't find a Hebrew manuscript, and we only have this medical context where it really appears. Now, apart from what you said yesterday, it's difficult because of Hakshama. So, I searched for a diagram, actually, not context, but you're absolutely right. I can agree, and I should delve more into this material. Thank you.
More a comment than a question, but since you mentioned the astromagic practice and fusion of astromagic practice among the Jews, I'm not sure, perhaps I didn't catch it, but I would have liked to hear also Mithridates mentioned, because he has this Arabic Latin translation in Codex he made for Federico da Montefeltro, Urbino, of this mysterious Itnanethan, which is actually the Mansionibus Lunae, so it's an astromagic treatise.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with Ibn Ethan, the scientist. So it's just attributed to the same name.
Yeah.
And there he has a magical square, which is a title in this like a surah, the form of the lion. But the magical square is actually a Saturn square, what you can find also in Agrippa. And
yeah, it's a Saturn everywhere.
It's in Arabic, the treatise is in Arabic, and it's beautifully written in Arabic and with Latin translation. But the magical square is in Hebrew. He says in the work they are talking about the dimension of the moon in this place, or in the sign of lion. But my father would use this square to cure, let's say, women illnesses, and so that's why he puts it in Hebrew and not in Arabic. So it's I think it's an interesting issue or instance of trilingual mixture, and this is precisely where Ficino was, and precisely when Ficino started also dabbling with this kind of astromagical practice.
Contrary to Pico della Miraglia.
Exactly. Ficino was also speaking of perfumes. Well, Beniveni was saying that the Ficino and Pico went together doing this kind of stuff. But this is a later, perhaps apocryphal testimony.
Yeah, from
like
its nephew.
Abolishing the distinction as a dialectic between the two. So, but more generally, and then I'll stop.
No,
and
wonderful.
Now, your lecture was so fascinating, and I get excited. But you mentioned very briefly that in Athanasius' case, two schemata, or two models appearing side by side do not match. And this is my experience all over the place. The sclerotic system and the astrological or astronomical system do not match.
Yeah.
And this for very, very simple symbolic reasons. The planets are not right, or are not correctly arranged. Because, you know, Zodzi had this problem and was suffering because he wanted the Trinity and then the 7 planets. But what he could do, in order to keep them symbolically in the right succession, the right follow-up, he had to put Binah, he had to put Saturn into Binah. And then he had to double the moon and say that Yesod and Malchut are the moon.
Yeah.
The active and passive aspect of the moon. So you see, you have to destroy somehow the system just because it didn't, it doesn't match.
Yes.
It doesn't match. The succession of good and bad planets or right and left Sephiroth does not work. And you have to keep Tiferet as the sun because of the Chima. There's no way of away from that. And then you have the succession. Mars is bad because it's red, it's Edom. You cannot. So it's, to me, it seems quite clear that it is a heterogeneous series, and no matter how hard you work, they were not fit.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your remark. It's, thank you. Well, one could add that arrangement of the 12 signs of the zodiac in the zodiac man also fluid. No, it's not a fixed order. So I find very differences, and so the whole subject is fluid subject. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I would like, we have now and I would like all of you to come outside with or without glass. I think it would be nice to have a picture of all of us in front of our gate with the wood, and then we all stand on the hill, and then hopefully
Before or after the aperitivo?
Yeah, because it would be nice to have a picture of almost all of us, unfortunately. When it comes. Which is the Hebrew expression for Adonai, Tamid. So it's my very specific pleasure to introduce my project partner Neil. And he will talk about the sephirotic tree in the eyes of selected Protestant scholars. So please, Niels, enlighten us.
Yes, thank you very much. And I will start with thanking everybody who made this workshop possible. Of course, the Officina, the Hausbrand Foundation, the co-organizers, and above all, of course, Elke, on whose shoulders most of the organization rested. So thank you so much, Elke.
The next one is
Yes. And with this, I will continue with my talk. At the beginning of the 18th century, a number of discursive descriptions of the Sephirot were published by Christian scholars, and we could term these descriptions, these presentations, as proto-academic, or at least the authors do not intend to put forward a theological argument, but really try to grasp what the Sephirot mean and what was originally intended by them. And one of the most famous is, of course, the great Hamburg scholar Johann Christoph Wolff, who wrote the monumental Bibliotheca Hebraea, and I'm pretty sure that most of you or all of you know about it. And in the second volume, he has a small treatise on the Sephirot and their nature. And he starts out by saying, and I quote, "The 10 Sephirot which constitute the Kabbalistic tree are subjects of extensive discussion among Jews and Christians alike. What they signify is so obscure that there is no consensus even on the name itself." So then Wolff goes on for, I don't know, maybe 20 pages, and he lists all kind of interpretations, but in the end, he's not convinced of anything. So he concludes his treatise with the words, "In my opinion, the whole matter suffers from greater obscurity than you can confidently expect to see light here. As those ancient Kabbalists whose writings have survived the ages spread mist everywhere and are not always consistent, while the more recent ones generally abandon their footsteps and deviate in all other directions. Thus, I would rather suspend my judgment here." So, though Wolff was skeptical himself, he tried to faithfully list several different views on the Sephirot, and interestingly, he focused on Christian interpretations. I want to talk about four Protestant scholars and their particular interpretation of the Sephirot. In sharp contrast to Wolff, they were pretty sure of what they were doing. And I would like to term these interpretations of the Sephirot Christocentric. And the four Protestant scholars that I would like to present is first the Dutch Reformed theologian Campigius Vitringa the Elder, whom Saverio has already mentioned. Then I would like to speak a little bit about the convert, the Jewish convert to Lutheranism, Johann Kemper, and finally about the two Lutheran theologians, Ernst Valentin Löscher and Johann Christian Schöttgen. But before that, I would like to go back to the very beginning, to the beginning of Christian Kabbalah and the Renaissance. And I think it's well known, or it's not too much to say, that there is a connection between the Renaissance and the Protestant Reformation. The Renaissance had this idea of going back to the sources, and the Protestants considered their Reformation to be a reformation in the truest sense of the world. So Christian Kabbalah is likewise based on this idea of pristine theology, and consequently, Christian Kabbalists often distinguish between ancient Kabbalah, which they see as primordial and true, and recent Kabbalah, which in their opinion is distorted and false. However, there is a profound difference between Renaissance Christian Kabbalah and Protestant Christian Kabbalah that I'm talking about, whereas the Renaissance Christian Kabbalah often is based on Neoplatonist and Neo-Pythagorean ideas, and it is fundamentally about the recovery of primordial wisdom through the study of ancient texts in order to gain universal insights, and hence also by tendency rather undogmatic. Protestant Christian Kabbalah is based on the conviction that their own religion is identical with the primeval religion, and they have managed in the Reformation to really reform the church and go back to these ancient sources. So they search for affirmation of their own confession's antiquity, and they end up to be extremely dogmatic in nature. So with this short introduction, let's see what Christian Kabbalists have initially to say about the Sefirot, and most influential is maybe Johannes Reuchlin with his idea that the upper three Sefirot, Keter, Chochmah, and Binah, represent the Trinity, whereas the lower seven are the attributes of God. This is adopted by many Christian Kabbalists and also Lutheran ones. Let's name only two, Johannes Steudner and Abraham Hinkelmann. But in the 17th century and in the 18th century, there we have these Christocentric interpretations that I want to talk about, both in Reformed and Lutheran Orthodoxy. And in order to understand these Christocentric interpretations, we have to take a look at the Protestant notion of sola scriptura, which purported that the clarity of scripture is one inherent quality of it. So Protestants abandoned the fourfold sense, the traditional fourfold sense of scripture. In Judaism, it's known as the pardes, and replaced it with the notion of the one true literal sense of scripture. And by literal sense, they did not mean the surface meaning, but what the Holy Spirit had originally intended scripture to mean. This is to say, as they postulated, that the Bible revolves around Christ, the postulated center of scripture, meaning of both the New and the Old Testament. The Lutheran dogmatician Abraham Kalof, for example, explained, inasmuch as Christ is the end of the law and the center of the gospel, therefore Christ Jesus is to be considered the length and depth and breadth and the focal point to which all things in the scriptures are related. Nay, he is the epitome and the totality of the entire scriptures. So Christ is obviously not mentioned explicitly in the Old Testament. Therefore, this uncompromising notion of Christocentricity facilitated a rich typological as well as allegorical interpretation of the books of the Old Testament, to which virtually everything in the Old Testament was applied to Christ. The combination of the two notions of the one true literal sense of Scripture and of Christ being the focal point of Scriptures entailed that in Protestant, in particular in Lutheran Christianity, the literal and the mystical sense became one and the same, at least with regards to the Old Testament. Moreover, it made the Father utterly transcendent, which in turn facilitated the interpretation of Old Testament passages that had traditionally been seen as, among others, prefiguring Christ as actual Christophanies. The famous Lutheran dogmatician Johann Gerhard explains, the Son is the person through whom God in the Old Testament spoke to the patriarchs and revealed to them his face, that is himself and his counsel or will. Just like we recognize a man by his face, so we recognize the Father by Christ. As a consequence, many typological, allegorical, and symbolical names of Christ were extracted from the Old Testament, which were then organized according to the two natures and the threefold offices of Christ. So you have basically an entire system of interpretation for the Bible that is like, if you look at it from the outside, it looks almost grotesquely dogmatic. But if you know what stands behind it, it's basically you take certain references that are clear from the New Testament and you build around it more and more interpretations. and more like, and thus you gain more and more names for Christ and synonyms. Okay, after this explanation, let's get to the first Protestant interpreter, namely Campigius Vitringus. He is the first one to put forward, at least to my knowledge, the first one who put forward in writing an uncompromising Christocentric interpretation of the Sephirot. In this particular treatise on the Sephirot, it was published twice, once at the beginning of at the end of the 17th century, and then again reprinted in 1712, if I'm not mistaken. And in the introduction to his treatise on the Sephirot, he makes clear that there's a fundamental difference between Old and New Kabbalah, which I mentioned in the beginning, and he writes, I've always been of the opinion that true ancient Kabbalah can be learned from the New Testament far better than from the writings, if not to say fabrications, of the new Jews. He rejects the division into 3 and 7. He says it's Platonic in nature and should therefore be disregarded in explaining the Sephirot. We neither take into consideration the useless explanations of the more recent Kabbalists who drew solely from Platonic philosophy, nor do we adduce any proofs of the mystery of the Trinity based on the principles of Platonic philosophy. However, he considers the notion of the Sephirot and the arrangement as he knew it from the writings of Jewish and Christian Kabbalists as ancient. He claims that they were known to the apostles and especially to the evangelist John, who, as Vitringa claims, refers to them in the book of Revelation. He writes, okay. He writes, and with this I come, like you can already look at it and I will talk about it in a second. Considering that this matter is neither without mysteries nor reason, I have come to the conclusion that these Kabbalistic Sephirot are arranged according to the figure of the human body, and that through them the ancient Hebrews have depicted for us the mystery of the incarnation of the Messiah. So he says that the arrangement of the Sephirot resembles a man, or more precisely an oriental king, meaning Christ, who is crowned with Keter and Tiferet, very important. He says it's a sash. Tiferet is like, you can see it here. And this, he explains, is an oriental sign of royalty. Whereas the other Sephirot are the attributes of Christ as the king. So in what follows, he connects each Sephirot verses in the New Testament, especially from Revelation. For instance, he writes, Keter, the crown, is ascribed to the Lord Christ in several places, like, for example, in Revelation 6:2, quote, and I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. Similarly, in chapter 9, verses 11 to 12, and I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat upon him was called faithful and true, and in righteousness he does judge and make war. His eyes were as a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns, and he had a name written that no man knew but he himself. Vitringa assigns a special role to the last Sephirah, Malchut or Shekhinah, respectively. For him, Malchut denotes Christ in his incarnation. In support of this, he adduces, among others, Nachmanides' deliberations on the Shekhinah and concludes, we clearly learn from the splendid testimony of Nachmanides that the Hebrews of old understood by Shekhinah the angel Goel and Metator, in whom God conceals his divinity and his qualities, in whom he, so to speak, dwells both in the tabernacle and in the building of the temple. All of these external instruments, like the cloud, the fire, and the Ark of the Covenant, in which God showed himself present to the descendants of Israel, were altogether proofs and hints from which arose that the Son of God would one day act with Israel in a truly familiar way and would dwell in a similar fashion to the tabernacle within an accepted corporality. We have splendid proofs for this in the Holy Scriptures. An excellent one is found in the Apocalypse of John, quote, and I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle, Shekhinah, of God is with man, and he will dwell with them. And in the gospel wrote, and the word was made flesh and dwelt Shechem among us. So far about Vitringa and his Christocentric interpretation of the Sephirot, saying that they all apply to Christ, they depict this Oriental king, and a special place is assigned to Malchut. And with this, I'd like to proceed to a totally different person, namely Jan Kemper, who after his conversion wrote a quite comprehensive Christian commentary on the Zohar, and he wrote it in Hebrew, as you can see. Here you have 2 pages from his introduction, and well, he has a very standard representation of the Sephirot, but as Yossi said in his keynote, answering his own question what Ilan really shows, he says whatever a Kabbalist or a group of Kabbalists thought that it could show. So let's see what Jan Kemper has to say. He divides the Sephirot into, like, he points out that there are 3 pillars, which is fairly standard, and he says that there are 3 triads of Sephirot. 3 times 3 makes 9, and the 10th Sephirot Keter represents the unity of the Trinity. However, if you read his commentary on the Zohar, you understand that actually he attributes all the Sephirot to Christ, and this is mostly based on associative New Testament references. Like, besides seeing Keters representing divine unity, Kemper also sees it as the messianic crown of Christ. With regards to the other Sephirot, he writes that Jesus is Chokhmah, wisdom, the second Sephirah, because the world was created through him. Christ is also Binah, understanding, since the alphabetical characters forming the word can be rearranged as denoting Ben Yah, son of Yah. Additionally, one of the most well-known prophecies about the Messiah states that the spirit of wisdom, Chokhmah, and understanding, Binah, should rest upon him. Moreover, Jesus is Chesed, mercy by implication, since it says in the book of Hosea, I desired mercy, Chesed, and the book of Psalms, the world hath been built with mercy. Chesed is also known as Gedulah, greatness, which refers in Kemper's opinion to Jesus as well, for he is the great one, Hagadol, in heaven. The 5th and the 6th Sephirah, namely Gvurah and Tiferet, are identified with Christ because he became glorious in power and strength and in glory after his ascension to heaven. Tiferet is furthermore one of the attributes of the Christian Messiah, since he is the glory or beauty of the entire world. Besides, Kemper adds that one can only be glorified, Leitpaer, through Jesus, as is written in the New Testament. Christ is Netzach, eternity or victory, on account of having overpowered Nitzeach, Satan, and because of him being eternal, Nitzri. Jesus is Sod, majesty, since he is the majesty of the Father and of the entire world. Christ is Yesod, the foundation by implication, because he's the foundation upon which the world rests. Finally, Malchut, kingdom, the 10th Sephirah, denotes Jesus for 2 reasons. Firstly, because he was announced by John the Baptist with the words, the kingdom, Malchut, of heaven is very near. Secondly, because he has established his kingdom in heaven and will do so also on earth at the end of days, wherefore Malchut is also the last Sephirah. So he does say that the Sephirot or the Kabbalistic tree represents the Trinity, but he does not follow the, let's call it, traditional interpretation that the first 3 represent the Trinity and the lower 7 are the attributes of the Trinity, the triune Godhead. But he says that in the arrangement they represent the Trinity, but in fact they are all attributes of Christ, which is of course in line with what we heard in the beginning, that the Son is the face through which we know and recognize God. Let's continue with our 3rd speaker, Valentin Ernst Löscher, who published a relatively short treatise of the Sephirot in the unschuldige Nachrichten von Gelehrten und neuen theologischen Sachen. His point of departure is Vitringa, and he has a problem with Trinitarian interpretations of the Sephirot in general. Like, this of course does not refer to Vitringa, but like Vitringa, he has a problem with Trinitarian interpretations. He says that the Godhead is triune, it's a threefold Godhead. God subsists in three persons, and there are 10 Sephirot. So he says that it basically cannot interpret it in a Trinitarian way. He critiques Vitringa, saying that Tiferet originally notes an ornamental headgear, and he says that the depicted man, the Oriental king, stands on one foot only. And he also says that the interpretation of Yesod, denoting the phallus, is obscene. So he proposes dividing the Sephirot into 5 upper Sephirot, the crowned king, i.e. Christ's, like this is Christ's divine nature, and the lower 5 Sephirot says they denote a cross, which is Christ's human nature. So Tiferet is the crown of thorns and represents the inscription of the cross, on the cross. He just puts it out there, and he adds a few arguments, among others a text critical argument. He says that there's an old version of Psalm 96:10 found in the writings of the church fathers Tertullian and Justin the Martyr, and they read the verse as in Latin, Deus regnavit a ligno, God ruled from the wood. And he, of course, being a Lutheran theologian dedicated to sola scriptura and the perfection of scripture, says that this does not mean that the text is corrupt, as the papists, the Catholics, claim, but that the church fathers were familiar with the ancient Kabbalah and thus knew of the Sephirotic tree as expounded by himself, Lesser, with this separation and this combination of divine and human nature and separating it into 5 and 5. The final Protestant or Lutheran scholar I want to present is Johann Christian Schöttgen, and who published this 2-volume book Hora Hebraica et Talmudica. And in the first book of these deals with the names of Christ. The second book contains an extensive collection of selections from the Zohar, in which verses from the Tanakh are interpreted as pertaining to the Messiah. And he has a special treatise on the Sephirotic tree. It's treated in the appendix of the second volume. I think here you can see dissertatio docens per Arbores Cabbalisticam Judea antiquissimi Messiam eiusque regnum indigitasse. Yeah, so he starts with 46 excerpts from the Zohar and just puts them out there and then systematically interprets them in actually a way that is pretty similar to what we've seen in Kemper. And he says that he's convinced that both the doctrine of the 2 natures of Christ and the one of his threefold office, which is a particular Protestant doctrine, are found in the Sephirot. He adduces 4 different sets of proofs explaining. The first set of proofs is adduced from those places, meaning in the Zohar, in which they explicitly say that the entire Kabbalistic tree pertains to the Messiah. The second set includes the places in which they invoke the synonyms of Christ in the same way. So here we have this, what I explained, this Protestant system of interpreting the Bible. The third set contains those places in which the Jews cite the same verses from the Bible as dealing with the Sephirot that they otherwise explain as pertaining to the Messiah. The fourth set consists in systematic matters which propose things regarding the Sephirot and the Kabbalistic tree that cannot be applied to anyone else save the Messiah. With regards to the alternative names of Christ, Schottgen writes, among others. One of the names of the Messiah is Shekhinah, as has been shown above in Book 1. Furthermore, Shekhinah, Chesed, and the Son of God are one and the same. The Shekhinah is full of effluences from the supernal well springs. Those that are sealed through Chesed and Gvurah are also sealed through and united with the central column and the Shekhinah. Certainly, all Sephirot are contained, joined together, and perfected in the Shekhinah. Hence, the Kabbalistic tree deals with the Messiah. Regarding the two natures of Christ, Schottgen expounds. The person of the Messiah consists of two natures, a divine and a human one, thus also the Kabbalistic tree. The divine one is shown through those places that say that he does not have a proper name, that his wisdom and understanding are without end, that his place eludes human cognizance, that he is righteous and compassionate. Furthermore, he bears the name Yud He Vav He. He is only one, a spiritual entity, and the cause of all causes. The work of creation and the honor of adoration is ascribed to him. The human nature shows itself in the fact that the lower side, namely earth, is ascribed to the Shekhinah. Hence, the Sephirot on the right-hand side are ascribed to the Messiah, son of David, meaning the divine nature, and those on the left-hand side to the Messiah, son of Ephraim, meaning the human nature. The Shekhinah is a body, in her right-hand side is life, and in her left side death, well and good. For when viewing the Messiah according to his divine nature, he is the living God. According to his human nature, however, he could and did indeed die. With regards to Ein Sof, Schottgen writes that on the one hand, it's an alternative name for Keter, and on the other hand, it's a designation of the unfathomable Father, who through emanation generates the Son, this is to say, the Sephirot. And with this, I conclude. In general, one could say that in Christian Kabbalah, occupation with the Sephirotic tree is often only marginally connected to the main parts of the treatises that Christian Kabbalists present. This is like from the persons that I've presented. Schottgen, even though his treatise is relatively comprehensive, it only is a very small part of what he presents in these two volumes, which cover something like 2,500 pages. This, I would say, one could say in general about Christian Kabbalah, with of course some notable exceptions. There's a certain detachment of the Sephirotic tree from Kabbalah, while at the same time acknowledging that it is of central importance. Often we see a complete disregard of the emanative power of the Sephirot and their many alternative names, even in Christian Zohar interpretation. And as I said, like at least with regards to the four scholars that I've presented, the main aim is confirmation of the primordial antiquity of Lutheran or Reformed Christianity. So we have this shift from Trinitarian interpretations in earlier Christian Kabbalah to Christocentric interpretations of the Sephirotic tree. And I would read it as actually a polemic against rivaling Christian denominations, against Judaizing Christian interpretations, or at least what they perceived as Judaizing Christian interpretations of Kabbalah, as found in Kabbalah Denudata, about which Luz has spoken so eloquently. I would like to end with something like a hypothesis that there is actually an interesting conceptual commonality between Sephirotic Kabbalah and Protestant Christocentrism. So there is Ein Sof and the utterly transcendent Father. There are the Sephirot as the self-revelation of God. And then there is the Son in Protestant Christocentric interpretations as the self-revelation of the triune Godhead. Then there is this idea that everything in Scripture pertains to the Sephirot, and the Protestants say that everything in Scripture pertains to Christ. And they have, of course, Christ has a threefold office. He has a divine and a human nature, so you have some variation that you can apply. And there is a plethora of names of the Sephirot, and on the Protestant side, there is the plethora of names for Christ, his two natures, his threefold office, and so on. And with this, I would like to thank you.
Thank you so very much. Sure, there are comments and looking in the right direction, so please. Yeah, Saverio, I think.
Thank you. That was fascinating, and in a way, you in your final remarks, not the very final remarks, but maybe the penultimate remarks, you did come in the direction that I wanted to ask you to reflect upon, and maybe for other people in the room to reflect upon as well. Your presentation brought back to mind something that I think I first encountered in a source when I was in Wolfenbüttel looking through the Nachlass of Nor, and there was a little tiny scrap of paper, and I'm just looking to make sure I get the details right. It was written in 1678 by Johann Benedict Harpsov II, the Leipzig professor, to Johann Jakob Schütz, the Lutheran hymn composer, and on this little note, he wrote something about how people haven't understood Kabbalah, and quote, because most of them know nothing about its Kabbalistic tree, which is the foundation of the whole doctrine. And then he writes something also about Hatzpan had given up on his Miscellaniorum Sacrorum because the Kabbalistic tree was too difficult. My question basically is, we could make it like a limited question, which is really like, what is the place of the tree in Christian Kabbalah as a, I don't remember anybody ever saying, a Jewish Kabbalist or the Kabbalistic tree is the foundation of the whole doctrine. This kind of almost metonymic equation or conflation of esotericism, Kabbalah writ large with the tree. To what extent is the tree, it seemed in your presentation, it really is that image, the arboreal schema. When they say it's on the right is like this, on the left is like, they're thinking of a diagram. To what extent are Christians more obsessed, maybe obsession is too strong a word, with the figure of the tree, with the schema of the tree, than even Jewish Kabbalists are? And so that's the bigger question, which is, just to put it out there in a very crass way, do Christians care more about Kabbalistic trees than Jews? When the Jews talks about an Ilan, maybe they're speaking about a genre, but they would never say, this is the whole doctrine, and is it because of the tree, the cross, that whole web of association that is more evocative for a Christian than it possibly could be for a Jew? I don't know. Just a really big, crazy question at the end of a conference on Kabbalistic trees that wants to bring Jewish and Christian takes into conversation. So for you and anyone else who wants to reflect.
It's not that I have a definite answer, and there are many people much more knowledgeable than I am here in the audience. I can speculate that you think about how they learn about Kabbalah. They often read the treatises of other Christian Kabbalists, and they almost all feature this diagram, this tree. And there is, like, at least I have not found it, maybe somebody can help us here. They understand that the Sephirot are central, and they cannot deny this, so they need to find a place for it. And so they see this diagram, and they say this is the essence, like it puts the entire doctrine in one diagram. This of course connects to what we have heard, that there is this diagrammic shift. But again, I have the feeling that it doesn't quite fit. Like on the one hand, they say this about the tree and they try to interpret it. They come up with these ideas that I've presented. And on the other hand, if you really look at it, it's often kind of I don't know what to call it, like it features prominently like in introductions, but then they don't do much with it because it does not really fit, or that's at least my impression. But I would love to hear what everybody else has to say. Yeah, Luz.
So it's possible that it's like visually or mentally, but it's easier for Christians because it's easily to like it evokes across. So perhaps visually it's something like naturally like in terms of symbols, like you are translating one symbol into another.
Syncretistic potential.
I don't know.
Might it be connected also to how knowledge becomes seen during the Renaissance and later as something that can be presented by an ultimate object? You can see it also in alchemy in the 15th and 16th century. They all looked for this specific stone, which was, yeah, the tradition is quite old, but in that time, they all looked for a single object. So there were physicians who looked for a specific universal treatment. There were alchemists. There were all kinds of philosophers who thought about specific diagram as combining all the knowledge. You can think about maybe Guillaume Postel, key of science, I think, or key of knowledge, which also might present the whole kinds of wisdom and it's I think about it as something quite more common among Christians to look for a specific universal solution, which can be represented by diagrams.
There is a key in very iconic sense in Ludovico Cavetto's treatise, For the Jews, written in Hebrew, was a plumber, and he has a micrographic key with the tetragram Yehoshua written out like brightly, saying with this key, or this key is all you need. All you need is this key because this is the key to Kabbalah, which is the key to Christianity. So you take the key, open the door, and you're in, if you believe. But I think one point, Yossi's question is very, very important, and I'm not sure we can answer it too fast because it implies also ramifications and subdivisions. For example, quid or what about the supposed aniconism or aniconicism of the Jews? So the fear of images. It has a psychological level. It's not only about do not make yourself images or pesel or whatever, but also how do Jews react in front of images? So this implies, for example, the Baroque, the predication to the Jews with images, the preaching. How could they react in front of images? Were they more exposed to images then, so they were more resilient against images? Don't trust it, it's an image after all. But then within Catholicism or within Christianity, you have the image-friendly Catholic position and the image-averse Protestant position. But then Niels showed us that Protestants, even Reformed theologians, working happily with images and reducing Kabbalah to an image. So we cannot find an easy solution to this problem. Images are there. I would say, and I'm thanking Leopold because he mentioned him, that Abi Warburg could offer us a solution because he was certainly a German Jew, fascinated by images, fascinated, I would say, by the mundus imaginaris, to use Henri Corbin's terminology, even if I don't espouse it, but it's there. The mundus imaginaris is this unheimlich, this troubling and fascinating at the same time, which is about images. So let's reduce it to the pornographic word. It is about the power of the image. And Kabbalah, my friends, is about power. That's so how the power means you have a small thing and you control a big word. So what's the power of the image? All you need to know is the image. You don't even know how to read. You catch the image. You hold the image like the Paulus Retius astrolabe with the Sefirot, who quote again. It's just about power. It's a device. Hopefully not a beaver. It's more like offering the fruit of God than offering an answer, because the images are not dialectic, and images are the terrain of confrontation within Christianity and between Christians and Jews.
Yeah.
Also, we were talking careful to know that in later Coptic Kabbalah, the Sephirotic tree is absolutely central to all the purposes and writings of the Coptic, whether we're interested in magic or other topics, or using the Kabbalah. If you take away the Sephirotic tree and all its adaptations, interpretations from occultist Kabbalah in general, it simply disappears. The occultic use of Kabbalah without the Sephirotic tree doesn't exist. So it's totally essential to later uses, either magical or otherwise, of the Kabbalah, whatever is intended by that anyway, in the later occultist literature, so later 18th and most especially 19th or early 20th century. Also, it's of course, most of it is projecting, as so many of our writers have done, projecting Christianity onto Kabbalah, while others are the other way around, projecting Kabbalah onto Christianity. And the ultimate example of that is, of course, Pastel, for whom Kabbalah is absolutely the ultimate face of Christianity. Christianity must actually become Kabbalah or some aspects of Zoharic Kabbalah in order to be the eschatological revelation, the ultimate spiritual revelation. It is Christianity, for Pastel. And that is through Kabbalah. And he identifies this new face of Christianity with Kabbalah.
Well, maybe that's where, the Syriac New Testament image becomes a kind of window into the Christian interest in
part of
that
it.
figure.
But here, Kabbalah, with Pastel and a few others, Kabbalah is not meant to be just a tool for illuminating the deeper secrets of Christianity, or rendering or giving Christianity back to itself, so to speak, restoring the meaning, the secret meaning of Christianity, and restoring the wisdom, the Christian wisdom. It's not just that. It's really that Christianity, according to most especially Pastel, Christianity is really Kabbalah, the Zoharic Kabbalah mostly. It is a new phase of Christianity must adopt in order to be endowed with its ultimate power for spiritual regeneration and fulfill its eschatological mission in the world. And so Jews and Muslims and everyone else will convert, because obviously Christianity will fill up the whole but Christianity as Pastel understands it, Christianity as Kabbalah, and not Kabbalah as Christianity. For him, it's totally the other way around. Obviously, it works both ways, but it's mostly Christianity becoming Kabbalah, or certain aspects of Zoharic Kabbalah.
If to bring it back to Neil's paper, I think and following Yossi's comment, then I think there's another similarity, which I'm not sure in what way it's around the image, because in a way what Yossi commented on is not so much a question of image, but the question of how to interpret Kabbalah more generally, as a plurality of images and words and understandings, or as the key metaphor where perush 10 sfirot, and not necessarily the Ilan itself, are a kind of a center to which every plurality, is I don't know, solved through a key, right? Yeah, the sfirot themselves. I mean, it doesn't have to do specifically with the image. Think of the criticism of Tishbi's commentary on the Zohar, namely the wisdom of the Zohar, how he reads it. There's this beautiful poetics, the image, right? And everything is just given a deciphering, right? That's Yesod, right? This image, okay, and that's all. And it's a tendency within Kabbalah, but only one. The Zohar, in many senses, is against the Perushei 10 Sfirot. And I think what Niels spoke about is the same. I mean, the way that Protestantism and the Kabbalists are together on the same boat is the question of how to relate to the plurality of the Old Testament and the New Testament in this case, right? And the plurality of images and words and depictions and so on versus the unifying principle, right? And there are all kinds of answers. And I think this is like the line of inquiry which is critical. And then the question of the image becomes interesting because in a way, the Zohar is all about the power of image when it is spoken, right? There's a place for all images. So it's, in contrast to Maimonides, this is the way to allow all images, to allow imagination a legitimate place. That's the beginning of the Idra Rabbah. So the image goes in two directions, this plurality and overflow versus the need to find one image which makes almost everything else redundant, or at least under the dominance of one figure or one principle or something like that.
Yes, but you have this tension at the end, the reduction of the luxurious plurality, like the forest of the Zohar, then you have to reduce it to a very simple image. What Niels was talking about is more like in the genre of the introduction. And if you have to introduce Kabbalah and you have only 10 minutes standing on one foot, you will need an Ilan very, very. Of course.
Never get to the point. Well, also this also the central idea of taking Kabbalah as a universal knowledge, which dates back also to Pico. Kabbalah is the key to everything. And this is especially visible in later occultist literature. But the less they understand it, the more it becomes a university and everything.
I mean, what's the what's the figure of the cross doing? Why you see that cross everywhere? What is it providing for us as is it kind of and is the Kabbalistic tree just seen as it's it's equivalent?
Yeah, but could you say, is it a symbol? Because many Christians would be happy with that. They would say, it's a symbol of our faith. But some other would say, it's a talisman. So again, what is it not?
Pico's problem. I mean, Pico has this discussion about the meaning of the cross. It's a talisman, however, it's a symbol.
In later literature, even the symbolic tree becomes and a cross obviously can become a magical object, and they do become a magical object.
I always had the feeling, but that's again my perspective, that it depends also on the bearing, how to say, on the different avatars, so to say, of the ritual, of the religious ritual. So starting from the Reformation and Counter-Reformation, for instance, in the Catholic Church, you have stress on the adoration of the cross, for instance, which you didn't have before. So the cross becomes something that you worship. And then, of course, like Pico was saying, you're not going to worship the cross as a talisman. You should not worship it as a talisman. But then I think many Christians were and sometimes are still doing that, meaning the object itself. And so possibly the idea of using the Sephirotic tree as a representation of the cross was also related to the preaching devices which became common in the Counter-Reformation. And this is also very much related to the new architecture of the churches after the Counter-Reformation period. I mean, that changed the space, totally changed the space and made it into something that was more suitable to preaching, to specific kind of preaching. And this kind of introductions or whatever you call them were very interesting for preaching activities. I don't know about Protestantism, but I guess more or less they had the same very central idea of preaching, which I think is today very important doing in the Protestant church. I mean, preaching is a major part of it's essential of the ritual. I mean, it's not the Eucharist, it's the preaching. Okay, so I think this is much related to that. Whereas in the former period, and you were saying it about the Zohar and this symbolic richness, I'm thinking of the many works produced in Western Europe related to this incredibly rich polysemic structure of the universe, which could be represented as a garden, as whatever you want, but like a forest of symbols. Rather than a cross. No, rather than a cross. Rather than a cross. Clearly that I'm thinking of the major universal encyclopedias of the Middle Ages. And I'm trying to think about that because on one hand, you have at the end of the 15th century, you have this sort of summary of this tradition in printed works, like I'm thinking of Ipnerotomachia Polyphily. It's a sort of encyclopedia of symbols with images. And images, of course, are part of the visualization of the symbols. You can't understand the symbol, which is a way to get to knowledge, to universal knowledge. You can't get to that universal knowledge without the image. But the image is very symbolic. It's very cryptical. I mean, it hides a lot. And this was very important at the end of the 15th century. Still at the end of the 15th century. Huh?
It's hieroglyph. It's like a hieroglyph, an Egyptian hieroglyph. So
yeah,
combining image with enigma.
Exactly. Whereas, and I think you were quoting that yesterday, at the end of the 16th century, beginning of the 17th century, you have this new dimension of knowledge, which is no longer related to symbolism, but to labels, I would say. So you have Alciato Emblemata, which became a major, how to say, handbook for universal knowledge. But it's no longer a knowledge hidden in symbolism, but in emblems. So it's self-understandable. Charity, mercy. So if you think of this Sefirot from this point of view, it's absolutely self-understandable. Because if you think of a Sefirah as mercy, instead of giving it a plurality of symbol, but just mercy, 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 and you immediately think. And I'm thinking, especially from a Catholic point of view, of the many representations and the many portrayals, portraits or representations of the symbolic attitude in the Baroque churches, of course. So this is also important. And again, you have in parallel, at least in the Jewish Italian tradition, the flourishing of brotherhoods, confraternities that were very similar or working in a very similar way to the Catholic confraternities, in which this massive use of symbolism was took place in a place, I mean, in a real room where you were exposed to such symbols. Okay, so this is something that well.
It's a pity that the second volume of Achille Bocchi's symbols was never published. Because in a letter, he says, I'm preparing the second volume. It will be Kabbalistic.
Yeah, but,
but
I think people like Bocchi or this kind of I don't know what you call them, erudites or whatever, Renaissance erudites, that were making use of pictorial symbolism, but at the same time the symbols of the letters, the use of the Hebrew alphabets, the Arabic alphabet, whatever. Like, it's very important to understand this change, this major change in the mind of the intellectuals starting from the 16th century on, which was also related, I'm sorry, I'm keeping thinking, but which was also related to the change, the major change in the university learning, in the university education in Europe.
That just goes back to the question, which is debated in scholarship for a long time, of how true it is to relate to the Kabbalistic understanding of language as symbolic.
Absolutely.
And because it uses already the Christian understanding that you described so well now, which is entirely through this lens, and it's not sure at all that that's the right and the hieroglyphical understanding as well. And how to understand mercy, right? And it's a question. There's no answer, but it's a very and you have to go into the philosophy of language of the Kabbalists, which is still much closer, I think, to the Muslim, Islamic, Jewish one than. And again, it's a question. I'm not sure, but that stands there. And of course, also to divine names. Are they hieroglyphs or understood entirely differently? To what extent are they pictograms or something else, and so on?
Starting, for me, this is something very striking that in the Counter-Reformation period, in the Baroque period, you start having a lot of tetragrammata in the Catholic churches.
And it's also that Luther was explicitly against the speculation.
Of course, he probably was right. I still do not understand what for a Catholic worshipper, what's the meaning of seeing these very strange signs hidden in the architecture of the church, on the main altar of the church, like an image. It's an image that you worship.
I mean, exactly this movement, we can also compare what Niels just said, that it's the claim to be the true interpreter of primordial wisdom or ancient sources. So that the Catholics, with all the speculations of the tetragrammaton, actually claim now again to have the true wisdom, the knowledge of ancient sources. And so it's this back and forth, which is actually then projected from a Jewish Christian field to a Protestant Catholic field.
because we noticed that the moment Elke spoke, I was saying.
The thorn of the yod of the tetragrammaton is the crown of thorns in chapter. The yod is chokmah, the A is bina, the ba, tifino, chesed, so the A is not. So it's a tree. It's the tree and it's Christ and it's the cross and it's everything.
I mean,
So, but it's picture not in Cordovero. Yeah, right.
Of the, also of the body.
Yeah.
Yeah. They got that as a body.
So, you see how productive.
Yeah, like I'm very happy that my talk started this discussion that I'm.
Yeah, so, I mean, I really enjoy this discussion and I don't want to interrupt it actually, but Flavia is really coming from the back or the administration in my neck. Maybe we have a break now and we enjoy lunch and photograph and whatever. And then shall we come back just to, I mean, our basic would be lunch will be 12:30, but maybe just a short question or maybe that's with regard to our potential publication. Who is willing? I mean, we still have to talk about all our options, our team of organizers, but we're still considering several solutions and also languages and whatever. But I mean, I hope that all of you will be interested in contributing to a wonderful volume on Jewish and Christian trees. Ilanot, forces, or whatever we call it. So, Arbores, so am I right with this, or does anybody say it's part of my new book and I cannot give it to anybody else? I don't want to have this experience again. Okay, so I assume correctly that.
Well, are we doing now the discussion about the publication? Because not just because I have received an offer. And I promised to bring it.
We can also do it after lunch. Or,
so we have to reconvene.
Or we can do it now. We can do it now.
Basically, from the reduction of Ilanot offers, if we have no other option,
which is the
here. From the journal. He wrote me yesterday that he is very much interested in the topic and in publishing. And it's a journal. It will be a special issue of a journal, and Elke or a committee will be the editor in charge. That is to say, he is not interfering. The good point, because it's a journal, but the good point is that he does not want money. So it has to be considered. They say it against our own interest because there's also a proposal of publishing it as a book. A new series at Absolute Verlag, which will be probably prestigious and probably also more durable. I hear that Enoch, as any Italian journal, is not considered in the list. In the index of the Israeli
That's the other thing is
Premier League publication. So this is really a drawback.
Usually do they make very good reproductions of pictures? I think it's very important that we have very good pictures in it.
Because you published as an editor one issue.
I think they were. I don't think they were color.
Yeah, but the images I had.
They don't have color.
I don't think any color though. It was all.
Some were colored, some of them yes, some of them are colored, some are not anyway, but they can do
Because I
also
think it's really important that we have a publisher with a high quality.
they edit very well, they make pagination Or this
And
is,
they do not offer, I think, language editing, I assume.
No.
no, but they do, okay, of course, it's double peer review.
Yeah, okay. Okay,
Also, I mean,
It's peer review. Identity.
yeah,
I mean, for the Israelis, especially the younger Israelis who need publications and journals that are on the list of the Abrams got Kabbalah on that list, so.
yeah, but I do not think you will have colored it.
I mean, Chair Press certainly does color.
I hope this is not recorded, but I think it's not important.
Sorry?
I only suggest it because it's on the that list for people for whom that's an issue. That's the only reason I suggest that you don't
On
need.
that list, it has some disadvantages.
I'd be the first to agree.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, we have the Harasovic option. And also, we are funded by the dynamics of religion at Frankfurt University, and they have a series at Moore Seebeck. So, but I haven't started talking and getting, I mean, I think we calculated roughly, so I think it will be about 300 to 400 pages, and we will have at least 40 images. And each of us has an article about 20 pages. So we can, after discussing, start writing to different options, and of course it has to be a peer-reviewed. I mean, also Brill might be an option.
Religions,
No,
don't they do special issues?
Religions do.
Yeah.
yeah.
Strangely highly ranked. It's like a first quartile journal, even though it's like from
Which one?
China,
Religions?
and it
Yeah.
seems like
It's Switzerland, it's like Switzerland.
they have a front in Switzerland.
Yeah.
I think it's like an
Yeah.
obvious Western
It is.
house snuck into the first.
It is,
quartile.
although it's ranked, it's
It's like a-
Q1.
I know, that's what I'm saying, but in the
Yeah.
first quartile, it's bizarre.
Is it on the list, on the Israeli list, or
This
Which
is, I
of them?
have to check, maybe somebody can send me the list
was-
of the
Which
Israeli
one?
list, the link to the Israeli list. Because I mean, because the other one is, of course, the advantage of the Judaica series and the Goethe, they do not charge you for printing. But of course, all the editing is your responsibility, and I have mixed experiences with the Goethe.
Color printing.
The color printing might not be so nice. Actually, and so, I mean, it's not so easy to find a series that has